audio. So this is Bradley. He can tell you a little bit more if you'd like. He has been through the Freeway Discipleship Program in Ash Grove. And Bradley's one of the guys, I've seen a lot of people come through the program, and Bradley's one of the guys I can remember the first day he started. So I'm going to turn things over to him, and when he gets done, Mark will come up and sing another song, and we'll introduce our next one. So you can either hold the mic, or if you think you don't need it, you can just set it there.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Josh. I remember Josh from when I first came in, too. He was somebody that was always at each of the... seemed like each of the freeways I go to, and he's like, that's right. So he was a participant in the, in action in the churches and the recovery outreach I was part of. Okay, my name is Bradley Wayne Thomas. I grew up in Willard, Missouri, which is not too far from where I live now in Ash Grove, and by a couple of knucklehead parents that were bikers, and I learned a lot of stuff that was, some of it was right, but most of it was just lies of the world that I grew up in, that were instilled with me, like drinking whiskey and smoking pot. I thought was normal. I thought that's what you did, and that was the way I was ingrained. But Christ changed my life, and through my grandparents at first introduced me to church, and that's where I met Jesus. It was later before I got saved. I wasn't saved until I was almost 20 years old. It was back in 1998, of the summer of 98. And my life wasn't perfect after that, by no means, because I kept running from God. And I ran a lot, and He caught me a lot and captured me over and over with, I'll explain later, just all kinds of different ways. But man, it's been a sweet road the past couple years. God's done a work in my heart. I met up with Freeway Ministries, and there was something about them that seemed really real and really capturing, and it was from hearing the Word of God. That's how our faith comes from, right? And when I met with Freeway, I kind of disconnected from them, because that was like right when they begun, and I think it was into 2012 when I met up with them. I was going through a rehab that gave you the opportunity to go there. Maybe they made the whole crowd go, I'm not really sure, but Casey Merrick picked me up in the bus and took me. Anyway, after that month was over, I kept continuing to go to Freeway, and I was like, man, I love this, but like the world got a hold of me many a times before it did, and I didn't reconnect with Freeway until recently, July of 21, and I've been in ever since. I really don't have much good to say about myself, but God has done really good work with my life when I surrendered to Him, and with a big help in Freeway Ministries for that, and the church itself. There's been many a times I've been arrested and did a lot of time in jail, but now I love God, and I know that wasn't the law that arrested me, or there wasn't the people and like bad judges or nothing. That was God who placed me right there, and I got in there and I dug into the Word of God, and man, every bit of it has changed my life. So I used a lot of drugs in the past of my life. I spent a lot of years in prison. I have some notes here in case I got lost in my head. I did learn some stuff from my parents, but most of it, like I said, was bad. Most of what's in my head is bad. As long as I surrender my heart and my life and my spirit, yield my spirit to God, though, I find that what's written in the Bible always proves true. And it says that if I put my trust in Him, I will not be disappointed. And I really like that, because I've disappointed myself so many times. I don't know about you guys, but I make bad decisions. Like, I don't have any really good credentials of any type or done anything spectacular, but I have a really long list of things I've done wrong. My notes are kind of sporadic. I was going to do it all by heart, and then I was like, well, maybe there might be some stuff that I'll miss. So, man, when I was young, my dad used to tell people that, well, don't ask Brad to do it. He'll do it so bad you won't ever ask him to do it again. And he always used to tell me that they found me under a rock. They claimed my brother, but they wouldn't claim me. They're like, yeah, we found him under a rock. But I know he was joking, and I love my dad a lot. I had my dad for the first 20 years of my life. I had my mother for the first 11 years of my life. My mom was murdered by meth addicts when I was 11. And my dad killed himself 10 years later, just not related incidents, but besides that man was with a broken heart. See, a lot of times when my dad was instructing me, I knew he knew best, and without him, I kind of ran amok. And the only instruction that I see that proves true is God's. And a lot of it, we don't like instruction, or we don't like to be told that we're wrong or whatever. But it says, I love Proverbs. Every day it's the 12th. I'm like, oh, here it is. Proverbs 12:1 says, if you love wisdom, you love knowledge. But if you hate correction, you're stupid. It makes me laugh every time. It's me and Kendall's favorite. Correction and instruction is the way of life. And, freeway didn't save my life. God does that. But they give you a lot of rules and instruction and stuff. And sometimes you're thinking, man, you didn't do it this way. But it's the way of life. They're only trying to help you out and love on you and show you what God's way is. And God's way is a lot of correction and instruction and daily renewing of your mind and of that. That's why I read a proverb. That's why I read a proverb every morning as soon as I wake up. Because I need a renewing of my mind on those things. One of my favorite life verses is trusting, because I have trouble with this. Is trusting in the Lord. Man, Isaiah 40:30, 28 through, I had it on my phone, I left my phone over there, but part of it is, those who trust in the Lord will find their strength renewed. And I think I need to say that every day before I get up and go to work, or then about halfway through the day, when my strength's getting weak. But, let me check out some other stuff. My testimony is probably going to be pretty short, because, but man, I love God. I love getting excited and to tell people that, I love Jesus. And I couldn't change my life. I've tried over and over. Same thing happened. I would run out and run amok and get involved in the flesh. And then I'd reap what I sowed as far as that goes. If you sow to the flesh, you'll reap to the flesh. And it's caused me a group of heartaches and pain. And I'm tired of that. And I'm like, God, why? God, what do I do? And clearly the instructions are right here. And with the rest of the saints giving their testimony of what works for them in their life. And it's written down in a great book that I carry around now with me all the time. So there's many things that were not that popular in my life before, like listening to sermons. Now I have two different vehicles. One's got no stereo and one's a bike and one's a car. And I'm like, I find myself wanting air conditioning, but just as much as that, I like to listen to a sermon. I like to listen to Johnny Mac. Anyway, I wouldn't care for that. I would just want to be off in my own head. But now, man, Jesus has done a sweet work in my heart, like I was saying, and a lot of good things have happened when I just surrender. And I've not wanted for anything or had a time where I was broke in the past couple years, because I just decided to do what other people were suggesting. And then what the Bible tells me to do. So what God commands is what I try to yield to. I'm not perfect. I mess up a lot. But I tithe, and just exactly like it says, there's not enough room. Man, is it Jeremiah 29:11? Or no, Malachi 3:10. I should have had that wrote down. But it says to bring your whole tithe into the storehouse, and he will throw the windows open of heaven and pour blessings down on you. And that is exactly what's happened to me in the past couple of years. Man. Let me look and see what else I got. Okay. I think I had mentioned that my faith has grown a whole bunch because I've been around godly men that are not afraid to preach right out of the Bible and exactly what it's talking about and meaning. And that is a peace and a calming. I know I'm not that much right now because I don't like speaking in front of people, but man, I just have a peace in my heart, and I try to be a man of few words, because my mouth will get me in trouble, and I'll say something, and I'm like, man, now I got to follow through with that, or I shouldn't have said that. I wasn't kind or whatever, and so I think that I come off kind, but it's it's because Jesus has done a good work in my heart. And man, it's speaking to you and telling you that my parents are all gone. I have one brother that is now a relationship is being restored with, which I had messed that up, and he had always been that guy that just, he'd never been in trouble, never does anything wrong, he's married, got kids, and like I have messed that relationship up really terrible, but it's being restored as we speak. So that's a blessing. That's really cool. I just didn't know if the man would ever talk to me again, because the way I'd acted, And man, my pastor I love, and I just try to do what he says, even though he'll come around, hey Bradley, just do whatever you want. I love you. You can go from either house if you want. You can move back in with the men. I don't care. Do whatever you want. He says the darndest things sometimes too, though. A lot of the things are contrary and opposite of what my flesh wants to do. Just exactly like most things are spiritually versus worldly. And it says to love your enemies and do good to them. Lend expecting nothing in return. And you will be son of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. And man, I just love you, church. I love every church. The church is, I've definitely, ever since being introduced to the church, I can see how faithfully and strong God's Word is. They've helped me out so much every single time I've been a dirty dirtball rat or just needed help and strung out. They've always been there for me. And when I'm weak, He's strong. So give me my voice back and give me some strength here, God. I love you, Lord. Man, I've had friends that were pastors, and I've called upon them in times of need, and they've not ever failed me, not ever led me, or forgot about me. Why wouldn't I love God? I mean, He's always been the strong and faithful one. My parents, like I said, are both dead from their own doing, from the flesh, living like however they wanted. I know they love me, but that wasn't... and that's where I think you might be able to see what's coming into where I'm giving God full trust is when I keep reading the Word, it keeps coming true. When I keep placing my faith in Him, I'm never disappointed. When I keep looking up for Him, looking to Him, keeping a constant conversation in my head with Him, man, whew. My parents let me down, and lots of human beings let me down, but He hasn't ever done that. All things work together for the good for those who love God. Man. He'll give you strength when you think you're weak. And I can't praise or thank Jesus enough for coming into my heart and living there. But, I thank you guys for the opportunity to come and speak to you. I do. I was excited and charged just to do it, and I'm glad I did. I haven't had an opportunity to do my testimony since, little bits, but John Stroop's always telling me, keep a little one ready. You got to keep a little one ready because, you never know who it might help and change. And I have the gift of crying now. I've always been, since meeting God, I've always been a little soft, and my biker friends were always like, oh, there's sweet Bradley, or whatever. I didn't like that very much, but now I'm okay with it. It's okay. Man, I love you, and I thank you for inviting me here, and I'm glad I came. It's blessed my heart to do so. So, I hope you guys got something from that. Thank you. Love you.
All right. Thank you very much. You may be seated. Wonderful singing.
Thank you. That's a blessing. Will's going to be our next gentleman to give a testimony, and I have to watch because I could get emotional here. I'm kind of like Bradley. People don't know this. I can have that gift of crying at awkward times is the difference. But Will and his wife Amber have had a very profound impact on me and my wife. I don't remember exactly when Will started the program, but I noticed him. And when you hang around Freeway, you notice people that are serious. And you may say, how do you know he was serious? Well, he was very intense with every little thing I saw him do. When he was singing, he was intense. When he had his Bible open, he was an intense. He's just an all-in guy. And it just reinforced to me what John Stroop says whenever he preaches. He doesn't say this always, but he says it often, that a lot of times former addicts make the best Christian because they're an all-in type of a person. They were all in on the wrong things, but man, when they come to the Lord, they're praising Him and they're worshiping Him in a way that I know for me, I would go and I would see, I'm like, man, I have something to shout about and I'm not. And I'd get convicted. It wasn't anybody else. It was God getting a hold of me. But I watched Will and I watched Amber. They actually did our premarital counseling. And I specifically picked them. I didn't know how close Angie and Amber were, but I actually picked them because I'm kind of like a stalker watching people, I guess. I don't know. But I just knew how they came together and have a blended family. And we have that. And I thought, well, I couldn't think of a better example to learn from. So, Will, why don't you come on up here and share what God's laid on your heart. And if you need a refill, just hold your cup up because I'm out of bottles, and I'll refill that for you.
Thank you, Josh. Well, good evening, church. Everybody with me? All right. Everybody excited to sing praise and hear testimonies about how good God is and how graceful and merciful He is? Boy, it's enough to get me fired up. My mouth is dry. That's how fired up I am. Josh, are you guys thankful for your pastor? I'm thankful for your pastor. I'm trying not to get emotional. But as he said, that we were honored and blessed to be able to do the wedding. And I got to know Josh. And I got to know Angie. Got to know their hearts on an intimate level. And it was, and we've hung on to that. So you guys got a good pastor and a good missus here. So, thank you, brother, for this opportunity.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. So many of you may know me from the wedding. Maybe I met you there. It was kind of a busy night, so I don't remember any of the faces. But if not, hi again. But I want to take some time tonight to share my story with you. Share what God has done, right? And I like how Josh shared that the testimony of Paul on the road to Damascus before this, because I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And I've been thinking about the way that God in all His sovereignty knew exactly where Paul was locationally, and He knew where he was in his heart, right? He knew him. And all the stuff I'm getting ready to speak of all leads to a moment just like that. So we're going to start now. I grew up in Sacramento, California. My childhood started off rough. I was in special education classes. They gave me every medication from A to Z to treat every disorder that I had. Mostly attention deficit disorder. I had trouble in school, behaviorally, academically. I started using drugs at the age of 12. After that, years followed of many arrests, drug rehabs, mental institutions. You name it, I've been there. In August of 2000, my daughter Lacey was born. That was enough to get me off drugs for about a year or so. Wasn't enough to get me to stop for good. I started using again. This continued on for many, many years. My addiction destroyed relationship with my daughter, my mother, my father, my brothers, my sisters, everybody. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my friends. It destroyed relationship after relationship. is who I was. And it wasn't about what I could do for you, is what can I get from you. I was a taker. My mom and my family moved to Missouri in 2006. After a long jail stay in Sacramento County Jail, I believe it was about 8 months, I had $20 in a bus ticket to Springfield, Missouri. So I followed my family. I got off the bus in Springfield. Water. And we started our journey to Crane. Anybody familiar with Crane? Stone County? There's a hand up. All right. So you know what I'm talking about. I got a job. I rented a house. I bought a car. I had everything on the outside looking like I had it together. My daughter was coming over on the weekends. My oldest daughter, Lacey, she was coming over on the weekends. She was still living with my mom, but superficially, I had it all together, right? On the outside, the surface things, they looked to be intact. That wasn't enough for me. I remember I was riding when my grandma and my mom picked me up from the bus station, and we were riding through Crane, and my grandma points out of the house, on a house on the side of the road, and she says, they call me Willie down in Crane. They don't call me Will, they call me Willie. Willie, you stay away from that house. Well, thank you, Grandma, for showing me where the drugs are at. I'll make sure to go there if I decide I want to get high. It wasn't long after that I had lost my job and my house and my car, and I ended up living in that house. The same house that my grandma told me to stay away from is the same house that I frequented for a long time and then ended up living there. I ended up injecting methamphetamine for the first time in that place. And then I journeyed into opiate addiction in that place. And this place was bad. When I say it was bad, it was rough. I remember being in there using drugs and having mice crawl up my shoulders, up to my arm, and get over here onto this arm. Just crawling. And I was comfortable in living like that. You couldn't pull me out of that house for nothing. I was going to stay there. This went on for about 4 years. I decided that I needed to get out of that place, and I needed some help. So I went to, first things first, I went to a doctor, because I got to handle this opiate addiction that I had, and they prescribed me Suboxone. Now, Suboxone is something they give, I don't know if you're familiar with it. If you're not, it's something they give opiate addicts to maintenance their opiate addiction, or most generally to get them off of opiates. But in my case, I became dependent on that as well. I found a program that would allow me to take this medication and still be a part of their program. I stayed in their program. Of course, I graduated the program because I was medicated and I could do things my way there, right? I still had a substance controlling me. I believed that I was fully dependent on Suboxone for everything in my life. It was basically my worship. It controlled whether I laughed, whether I smiled, whether I cried, whether I got up and went to work. No matter what I did was based on whether or not I had that drug on my tongue that morning or not. If I didn't, it wasn't going to be so good. So I completed that program, and in that time of the year of the program, I met a woman. And we decided that we were going to do something. I'm not going to call it the right thing, because it's definitely not the right thing, but we decided to move in together. We decided to shack up. We all know how those situations work out, right? You got two people that are in recovery, don't even really have just barely a year, barely hanging on, and they decide to move in together. Not even married. That didn't work out. So, that didn't work out. The Suboxone failed, and I was back to the streets again. Back to the same behavior that I was in before. This time, my addiction had taken me to places I never thought I would end up. I was homeless in Branson for the next 10 years. And when I say I was homeless in Branson, I mean I was that guy. If you know where, you guys are familiar with Branson, how Branson is, how you got IHOP at one end, and then you got Chick-fil-A and Steak and Shake on the other end. Well, I've been 86 from every place up and down that strip. From every hotel to every restaurant, they don't allow me in there. Well, then, that's how it was. My addiction was so bad at this time, I can remember being on the streets, not having anywhere to go, and having narcotics on me, but I didn't have any way to use those narcotics. This is going to get a little deep, and I'm not saying this to glorify. I'm saying this to get you to understand the depths of the pit that I was in. Does that make sense? So, I have narcotics. I don't have any way to use them. I used needles, and the Walgreens was closed, so I didn't really have any needles to use drugs, but that wasn't going to stop me. I remembered that there was a restaurant that I used to work at that had a biohazard box on the wall where people would use their needles for insulin and then put them in the biohazard box. Well, I decided that I was going to go in there and rip that box off the wall and use it, and use the needles that were in there. That's where my addiction had taken me, to pretty much playing Russian roulette with needles. In September 2013, there was a beautiful little girl God brought in this world named Madison Rose. Madison, put your hand up. She's got a big bow in her head. If she doesn't want to put her hand up, she's right there. You can't miss the bow. As beautiful as Madison is, and as sweet as she wasn't enough to get me sober. My addiction had such a strong hold in my life that it seemed like I was always going to be homeless. I was always going to be a needle junkie. After a meth charge that I received in 2015, I went to prison. When I got out, I decided that I might try something different. I home planned to my mom's house, which was nothing new for me. At this time, when I got home, I realized that my mom had a disease called Wagner's vasculitis. It's very rare. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that or not, but there's no actual cure for that disease. And we'll get back to that, knowing my mom was sick, okay? Hold on to that one. So this would be the first time I ever heard of Freeway Ministries. I started watching John preach the gospel on YouTube. And like brother was saying right here, that there was something special about Freeway. And I knew I wanted to be a part of it. But I wasn't sure how to get there. I started attending a local church. I said a prayer after a pastor. I got baptized. But I was missing two things. I was missing a full surrender. And I wasn't ready to repent. So was I truly saved? No, I wasn't. What happens after that? Drugs came right back. I got into an argument over a drug dispute at a hotel in Branson where I was beaten with a pistol. And I was left for dead. And when they beat me with a pistol, they beat the whole side of my left side of my face up, where I had screws here, and screws across my jawbone. So you got my orbital bones broke, where this bone connects here to your brain, which the doctor said my brain was hanging out of my brain bucket. So I was actually having to hold my face up like this. While in the hospital, I was in the emergency room, and while I was there, they were checking my, with a reflex. They were checking my reflex. And when they did that, a bag of meth fell out of my boot. And I turned to the nurses, and they were looking at me. I'm holding my face up there. And I said, well, what are you going to do with that? She said, well, I'm going to hand it to the police officers that are waiting out there for you, silly. I said, well, But there's two better options right on the side of you. You have a toilet, you have a trash can. Those are great ideas. Let's put them there. No. They gave them to the police officers that were waiting for me in the lobby. The thing I didn't realize is that God was going to use that bag of meth to bring me to a place of surrender. Like Brother said, He works all things together for the good. Can God use a dirty bag of methamphetamine to get His man to surrender to Him? Yes, He can. Standing right in front of you. They didn't have the means to take care of me down in Branson at their hospital, so they transferred me to Kansas City to where I could have surgery on my face. I got out of the hospital, went back to my mom's house where my mom was struggling for her life. I stayed there, took all the pain medicine they gave me, and got healed up. Then I hit the streets running. I was ready to go again. A near-death experience where they almost took my life was not enough to get me to stop. I was going to serve my flesh no matter what. At all costs, I was going to serve my selfish desires. 9 months go by, and I think that I probably got a break from this methamphetamine, right? I've heard nothing of it. No charges, no case is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that this one got lost. Well, if you know the court systems, nothing gets lost. So, in the meantime, I got a ticket, maybe for, I think it was open container. Open container in public or something like that. I decided that I'm going to go to court with this for this open container. And this was August 17th, 2017. I stand before the judge. Well, let me tell you this. Let me get back a little bit. Before I walk into that courtroom, my friend drops me off. I do the last bit of drugs I have. I take the last bit of pills I have, and I walk in that courtroom. I walk in that courtroom thinking I'm going for a misdemeanor. Thinking I had the other one fooled, that we got that one over on him. That's not the case. The judge reminded me of that meth that fell out of my boot. I got the meth charge. And it was a prior and persistent. And the judge is not happy with Mr. Clendenin because it's been an ongoing thing with me in Taney County courts. So she's telling me she's going to throw the book at me. She's going to give me the max if she has her way with it. So they send me back downstairs. They arrest me, no bond, send me downstairs. One day I was walking the pod, and in jail you walk circles all day long. And just walk circles around the tables. There's nothing else to do. We want to move around. You got to walk. So we're walking, and as we're walking, I'm getting close to the door where the pod, where they feed you and where the COs come through. I'm walking past that door, and one of the COs comes in and hands me my uncle's phone number. They don't typically do that. Not special. Wasn't getting special privileges. I knew something was wrong. So, I look at the piece of paper. It's got my uncle's phone number on it. I give my uncle a call. And that's when he told me my mom's fight finally had ended. That it was over. She was gone. This was very tough for me because the night prior to this, I was on the phone with my mom begging her for money. Thinking about myself. And I remember my mom telling me, if you keep asking me, I'm not going to send you any money, honey. I'm not going to do it. Okay, well, we'll see. I'll talk to you tomorrow. I never got a chance to talk to her again. At this time, I went back and I pushed the button, and then I asked the same guard that brought me that phone number, I asked, hey, can I get away from this? Can you open my cell? Because they actually lock you out of your cells in Taney County. Backwards, I know. They lock you out instead of locking you in, so you're in the day room all day long. It's like a 12-hour day. It's not fun. Or can you put me somewhere where I can be alone? I can't deal with all this right now. And they actually granted that. And they put me in the rec room. And when they put me in the rec room, I got on my knees and I cried out to the Lord. And He answered me. I put my faith, I put my trust, and I repented, and I laid my heart out before Him. And He saved me. I surrendered, I repented, and I put my trust in Him. I started working with my dad, which nobody would ever think that was going to happen, but my dad was willing to help me. I started working with him. He still lives in Sacramento. And my aunt. And they're kind of working together to try to figure out, if they let me out, what they're going to do with me. My aunt started talking to John Stroop. And she asked me, have you ever heard of Freeway Ministries? And I said, well, yeah, I have. Remember I said I always wanted to be a part of Freeway? I didn't know how. But God put me a part of Freeway. My aunt started talking with John Stroop, and by God's grace and mercy, they released me to John Stroop. The cool thing about getting released to John Stroop is when I did that, I'll always remember this, is that when I knew it was different, because they weren't just going to release me and let me go and wait for him at the street corner. That they told me that he personally had to come pick me up. So when he came and picked me up, they said, I was in my cell already. It's probably about 7:30, 8 o'clock. I was in my cell. They rang the button and said, Clendenin, roll up your stuff. It's time to go. So I get my things together. I head out. They open up. And I'm standing in front of like where the COs sit in the middle. And I could see their little monitor. And I could see John out there waiting for me. You can see him walking, pacing back and forth. He'd sit down. He'd pace back and forth. He'd sit down. I'm like, well, what is taking so long? Well, Mr. Clendenin, you had a warrant pop up. Okay. Well, we've been standing here for an hour. He's pacing back and forth. If you guys are going to keep me, send him home. Don't get so excited. Will, calm down. They let me out. They recalled the warrant at 8 o'clock at night. That doesn't happen too often. So I started in the Freeway program. I got released to John Stroop. And when I looked at him when I got in the car, and I said, you know what, man? I don't have anything. I don't even have underwear. But I know I'm supposed to be with you. I know I'm supposed to be with you. I stayed in the program for 1 year. Then I stayed in the program another year. I wasn't ready yet, and I knew that. John asked me, I told him John that, and he asked me if I wanted to stay and lead the house. I said yes. So in that 2-year period through discipleship, I began this relationship with Jesus and the Word of God. And I started getting visits with Madison. And I realized that in those visits with Madison, that the living conditions that she was in wasn't the best. That she was actually living in a drug house. And so the Lord provided me funds so I could get a lawyer, and I started fighting for Madison through prayer and legal issues. And And in 2019, I received full legal and physical custody of my daughter, Madison. And that same year, I started praying that maybe God would send me a wife that could help me raise this little girl, because I know nothing on how to do hair. I know nothing on how to raise a little girl. She's going to get tired of me mix matching her clothes and send her to school in pajamas, you know. So in 2021, I married Amber. And it was officially brought into her family. The crazy thing is, I met her family years prior to that because they asked me to come back and share a testimony in Taney County. And I met her family 4 years before I met her. And little did I know that they were praying that I would marry Amber. Power of prayer. So here we are. Currently, I work at Corwin Dodge in Springfield. I serve with our family on pastoral staff at the Sanctuary Hope and Restoration Connection. We pastor a recovery ministry back in Taney County, where it's very unique being back there and working with the jail and the judges and the sheriffs and all these people that I've spit on and cussed at and acted like a maniac in front of, that they now actually speak to me. That jail administrator, I can remember calling him every name in the book. Today, when I message him about getting somebody an application for a program or getting them a Bible, he responds to me in 3 minutes. So, that's where we're at today. God has not only saved me, but He's given me life. One of the things I could tell you is that I stopped believing in what society said about me, and I started believing in who the Bible says I am. I started thinking about all the labels that I had as I was a child. And I remembered that no label can keep me in bondage when I have been set free by the blood of Jesus Christ. Amen. There's no label. Amen. There's no charge. There's no nothing, because I stand guiltless. Yes. Because my debt has been paid.
Yes, Lord.
Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, which I am now in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away and the new has come. I am not held to that anymore. Is life perfect? Absolutely not. But I serve the one who is perfect. And He is the one that's in control. And He is the one that has His hand upon my shoulder. So I thank you guys for listening to that story. I know it was a little long and probably hard to follow, but hopefully it wasn't too bad. What do you think, Georgia? Okay. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you, Brother Josh.
It's like Ryan's making his way up here, and I appreciate Ryan so much. He has really matured a lot since I've met Ryan. So go ahead, brother. Appreciate you stepping out and stepping up. I'll turn it over to you for a few minutes.
I'd like to thank the guys from Freeway Ministries that came out. My brother Derek Johnston, you guys probably know. He's part of the program, and it's awesome. The stuff that he has done in his life, and we come from the same background and grew up. I might get emotional during this, because just the power of God, and how He can work in our lives, is just amazing to me, and I'm going to tell you like where my story starts, you mean. Like I said, I'm not trying to glorify, like you said, anything, you mean. I'm just going to let you know where I was at and finish off and tell you how God has worked in my life, you mean. My name is Ryan Johnston, and I grew up in Sparta, Missouri. I had a great set of parents. I mean, they always took care of us and made sure we were provided with everything we needed, you mean. But they were also drug addicts. And I know growing up, I remember, you know, everybody used to get together, you mean, and smoke weed, and it was like, that was like the thing, you mean. Everybody like came together and they were smoking and having a good time, you mean. And I say to I always say, I was a drug addict before, I ever used drugs, I always wanted to, look at that, and I was like, I couldn't wait to be a part of that, everybody having a good time, going to the creek with Dad, kegger parties, everybody happy and enjoying themselves, and that's what I wanted, I wanted to be a part of, and I started, my parents divorced, when I was 12, at the time, we started coming to Mount Zion Baptist Church right here, Linda, Janice, Karen, she's not here, but, these are all the faces I remember, and this is where I learned about God, right here, me and my brother and my dad were baptized here, and everything I learned here, come in handy, later on in life, when I found I needed God and I needed Jesus, I knew where to turn, at the age of 12, started smoking marijuana, on a regular, 15, started using meth, and I always thought, it was like recreational, it was a good time, get together with everybody. I was like, it's not that bad, it's not like I'm using a needle or nothing, and at the age of 17, I was introduced to a prescription drug called Oxycontin, and that's when I used the needle for the first time, and everything, everything I did, revolved around drugs. Defining ways to use more, and get more, and my role models were people that were making dope, They had the money, they had the power, they had the women, and that's what I wanted, and I eventually caught charges when I was 17, I got a 3-year sentence, I ended up going to prison 4 different times on that 3-year sentence, and in the prison, it wasn't bad enough to make me want to quit, That's what's crazy, you keep on using, no matter how bad the consequences are, I had a good stretch, after I got out, is when I got, I learned how to make meth, I learned how to make the poison, and it went really downhill from there, I had unlimited drugs and cash flow to do what I wanted. My prescription addiction, really took off, I had to use every day, or be sick, that was life, this went on, for a long time, not employed, all I did is sell drugs and use drugs, and it got to the point where using drugs weren't fun anymore, it was like a full-time job, having to make sure I always had something, and I was hopeless, I was a hopeless drug addict that thought, I would never do anything with my life, that I would die, a junkie, and God intervened, He, in 2017, a guy that I had been dealing with, he brought a lady with him, and I sold her some drugs, turned out that lady was a state cop, and And come to find out, you mean, they ended up charging me with sales, you mean, and they wanted to give me 10 years, you mean, and from my past, in and out of prison, you mean, I never did a real long stint, you mean, maybe, I think a little over a year is as much as I ever done. I knew from that I did not want to go do 10 years, you mean, and I knew I was going to have to make a change, you mean, so you mean, I went and got a full-time job, you mean, I started attending church, you mean, I knew, you mean, like I say, you mean, they say, God made a way when there was no way, you mean, and that, for me, is so true, you mean, there was never, in my outlook, that there was any way that I ever was going to be able to get clean, you mean, and through God, you mean, He made it possible, you mean, but you mean, I started attending church, but you mean, I was still using off and on, you mean, and it was always a thing where, where we was attending James River every Sunday, me and my Ashley were, you mean, and it was, everybody goes up to the front, at the end, you mean, and I was like, no, you mean, I'm still using, you mean, I'll wait till I get clean, you mean, to rededicate my life, and you mean, and then the pastor had said something, you mean, God meets you wherever you're at, you mean, you don't get clean and get with Jesus, you mean, you get Jesus and then you get clean, you mean, that's right. And I found that in my life, you mean, and like I said, attending church, a full-time job, you mean, my bosses, you mean, when I went to court, you mean, were willing to go, you mean, if they needed them to, you mean, to vouch for me, you mean, people, you mean, to vouch for me, a person that, you mean, that was unemployable, no one wanted to be around, you mean, to come around, you mean, and people willing to stand up for you, you mean, and so, you mean, I ended up going to court, you mean, and like I said, the prosecutor wanted to give me 10 years, and I just went ahead in front of the judge, you mean, and she seen what I was doing, you mean, and she said, you mean, that she gave me probation, 5 years probation, you mean, with a 10-year backup, you mean, pretty much enough string to hang yourself, you mean, like, all right, we'll let you go, but if you mess up, you mean, you're going, you mean, and once I got, you mean, once I was clean, you mean, I was like, I never turned back, you mean, once, like I said, I rededicated my life, you mean, I got baptized again, you mean, I went home, you mean, it's like it was changed, you mean, I got rid of all the numbers in my phone, you mean, because like I said, I was still using, you mean, I had made that choice, you mean, and you mean, going on, you mean, like I got nephews and nieces, you mean, I love kids, you mean, getting, riling them up, and, and, you mean, I just have fun, you mean, like that, you mean, and I wanted one of my own, you mean, and me and Ashley, I'll just give you a couple examples of how God has worked, you mean, it's crazy, you mean, me and Ashley, you mean, had tried, you mean, for a kid, you mean, for a long time, you mean, and you mean, and it never happened, and so we kind of gave up on it, you mean, in a way, you mean, and also, you mean, we started looking for a house too, you mean, a few years back, and I mean, the way the housing market was, you mean, it was like we was putting offers in, you mean, over the asking price and getting beat out, you mean. So we finally kind of gave up on that too, you mean, and so, you mean, fast forward, her dad moves over here a couple minutes away from the church right here, you mean. And we stopped attending church, and I was looking for a church at the time too here, whenever we found this place. Her dad said a place had come open over here, and we ended up moving in, you mean. And we was looking for a church, and you know what? Mount Zion, you mean, this church family is a great church family, you mean. And I came back here, you mean, and as soon as I came back, you mean, Linda and Karen and Janice, you mean, welcomed me. It was like I never left, you mean, and it was so awesome, you mean, how God worked like that. You mean, I didn't find a house, we didn't to buy, but you mean God put me in a house 2 minutes away from the church I needed to be in, you mean, and through prayer, you mean, I'm a firm believer, you mean, and you mean prayer, you mean, and don't ever give up on prayers, you mean, before it happens, you mean. I find, you mean, a lot of people, and myself, you mean, have given up on a lot of prayers before that miracle happened, you mean. And I know, you mean, coming down here in the mornings on Sunday to the altar and praying with Pastor Josh, and you mean, and I know, you mean, we went to the blacksmith, Kyle Smith, I think is his name. I mean, he was a year older than me in school, you mean. It was just kind of cool, you mean. And now he's walking with Christ and doing the blacksmith deal, you mean. And I went up there, you mean, and prayed with him, you mean. And, you mean, he said that he had been through the same situation, you mean. And just the feeling, you mean, that something could happen, you mean. We had went up to St. Louis, I mean. We decided to do the, I don't know what it's called, but pretty much my sperm was no good, you mean, and I had to get a donor, you mean, and we had already been 2 times, you mean. They said the count, you mean, like, they wanted to be 10 million, you mean, and the first time was 20 million, you mean, the count on the deal, you mean, and it didn't take, you mean, come back, you mean, and she's not pregnant. And the second time, you mean, it was 10 million, you mean, the count, it was lower, you mean, and it didn't happen that time either, you mean, and I was ready to give up, you mean, like, I can't do this, you mean, and you mean, through more prayer, you mean, and you mean, I told Ashley, well, let's do it one more time, you mean, and got up there, you mean, and the count this time was 6 million, you mean, and they say, you mean, whenever you get that low on the count, you mean, they say it's the percentage, you mean, that Ashley was going to get pregnant was near to none, you mean, and I had that feeling, you mean, God is going to show me that He will, like I said, will make a way when there is no way, you mean, and He did, and Ashley got pregnant, and Adeline's in the back now, God has blessed me and has continued to bless me. Like I said, my brother's in the Freeway Ministries program. My family's walking with God. My dad, and was also an addict. And I know, like family get-togethers and stuff like that. People go out to eat and all that. What we did for family gatherings is we all got together and we made meth. And now, my father has passed. And we never really was, and I was really close, I seen him all the time, but I knew I had to distance myself, and he ended up, it kind of hurt, because when he passed away, I didn't see him as much as I wanted to, but before he passed, we weren't really, express our feelings kind of people, but, my dad said, I'm proud of you, and that was, never hearing that, was awesome, and my brother now, he's on the straight and narrow, he preaches, My brother, he was, like they say, it's amazing how God can take drug addicts, and like I said, he was part of the prison gang, he's very loyal, and instead of being loyal to the gang, when he got out, he was loyal to God, and now it's preaching, it's amazing, I think, some people, like, that know us in our past can see our stories, and like I said, our testimonies will make a difference in people's life. To see where we were at and to see where, with God, where you can go is amazing, and all I can say, is God is awesome, and that's all I got.
If you would just stay standing with me just for a minute, we're about to wrap things up. I'm just going to read a verse and I'm going to pray, and we'll get into the invitation time. I appreciate Ryan coming up here. I want to brag on him for just a minute. Ryan ministers to our kids.
Amen.
And I'll tell you how he does that. When it's not 900 degrees outside, he's outside with them playing basketball, just little things that are very, very important, and I appreciate how God's using Ryan. So Acts 26, this is after Paul gave testimony to King Agrippa. I want you to pay close attention to King Agrippa's, first Paul's question and then how King Agrippa responds. So Acts 26 and verse 27, King Agrippa, believest thou the prophets? He says, do you believe what the prophets had said in the Old Testament? Do you know this is true? And he says, I know that thou believest. I know you don't doubt what they wrote. I know you don't doubt truth that's in the Old Testament, because that's all they had at that point. Then Agrippa said unto Paul, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. What a tragedy it'd be tonight if somebody walked out of here and said, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. Or you walk out of here tonight and I'm almost persuaded to give a fresh surrender. I'm almost ready to let go of what I need to let go of, but I can't. I'm going to pray and we're going to have a song of invitation tonight.